Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Your vendor controls aren't enough. Defending against today's AI-powered payment fraud. My name's Mark Brousseau, President of Brousseau and Associates. I'm pleased to be one of your presenters for today's webinar. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Phil Binko, the CEO of VendorInfo. I have just a few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially get started. To ensure call quality, everyone's voice lines have been muted today. We encourage you to ask questions throughout today's webinar. To do so, simply use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit your questions to me. I'll answer your questions at the conclusion of today's webinar. And finally, an on-demand recording of today's webinar will be made available to all of you within the next few business days. We hope you'll share it with your peers and your coworkers. So, fact is that fraud has always been a part of the accounts payable landscape. I'm old enough to remember when we used to say, well, if only we got rid of these paper checks, then all our payment fraud would go away. Well, there's no question that the volume of paper checks has declined, and yet fraud today is near all-time highs. In fact, check fraud is actually risen in the past year. Well, what's happened? Well, the fact is that while our check volumes have declined, the nature of fraud has changed considerably, and you're probably feeling it in your organization today. And today, when I talk to accounts payable leaders, they tell me their concerns about fraud are higher than ever. In fact, in a recent study conducted by the Institute of Finance and Management, they found that fraud and compliance concerns were the number one thing that worries AP leaders about their departments today. And a lot of this has to do with artificial intelligence. It'll certainly be a big focus of today's webinar. And it's changing how it is that fraudsters are able to perpetrate their crimes. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about where it is that traditional vendor onboarding and validation controls fall short in this new AI era, if you will. We'll also arm you with some tips on how it is you could defend your organization against AI-driven impersonation, business email compromise attacks, and even phony bank account change schemes. And as I said, we're going to give you a practical action plan for the next 30, 60, and 90 days. So you can put some of the recommendations we give you today to work in your organization. And finally, Phil's going to be along to give you a live demonstration of VendorInfo, one solution that can help you verify and validate details to mitigate your risk of fraud. Today, the nature of fraud has changed, as I said. It used to be that fraudsters were all about hacking into our systems. Well, today's fraud schemes are much, much different. They no longer need to hack into a system. They just need to trick someone. And this is really the scary thing about today's fraud schemes. Fraudsters know an awful lot about how it is that accounts payable departments operate. Just take this one data point, for instance. Law enforcement officers tell us that they have discovered that many fraudulent emails arrive at the end of the business day or at the end of a business month. Well, why is that, you ask? Well, think about it for a moment. By then, our eyes are getting tired. Maybe we're rushing to clear off our desk. Maybe we're in a hurry to get out to pick up our child from soccer practice or school or some other activity. Fraudsters know this. They also know that when it comes to the financial close, we're equally burdened. And so what they do is they time their scheme so that they can find the most optimum time to be able to sneak in and be able to perpetrate their crimes. And the problem is that AI now makes that path easier. It allows them to create polished messages that look like it came from, well, in many cases, your CFO or your controller, or maybe a supplier that you've been doing business with for years. As we'll show you in a few moments, the combination of social engineering and this AI can make schemes look really believable. And while we might have hardened our defenses, built very expensive firewalls, and have tools for detecting anomalies, the reality is that the biggest vulnerability in our accounts payable department might be all the way at the very beginning of a relationship with a supplier. It's upstream when we're collecting that vendor data and we're making changes to vendor information. This is what fraudsters are counting on. Today, AI is industrialized the art of looking legitimate. Back in the 80s, we had this rash of emails that came in from the Nigerian prince who wanted to wire us $1 million. All we had to do was give him a credit card number and the money would be on its way. And, and those were laughably silly cases. In many cases, it was awkward language. It was clearly blasted out to lots of people, and in most cases, it had nothing to do with accounts payable or you or I's daily lives. But today's schemes are much different. In many cases, it's hard to tell a phony email from one that's the real McCoy. They're fluent. They're in English and they're in our right time and date stamps. They're in many cases branded for just the way that your supplier's emails would look, or maybe the email for an ERP that the fraudster is trying to impersonate. In many cases, they also have personalized information. You see, in many cases, fraudsters are using phishing schemes as their on-ramp to perpetrating these crimes. So they hack into not only just the email of maybe a coworker of yours, but maybe even into the email of your supplier. And they lie in wait. They look at how it is that the the targets communicate. So they might know that me, for instance, I'm a big Eagles fan. Well, maybe they drop that in because they know that they see that the supplier talks to me about the game on Sunday or maybe something else between about our kids, for instance. And this is the information that they start to collect. And then they use artificial intelligence to create documents that look just like the real McCoy. A little while back, I spoke at an IOFM conference and I was talking about business email compromise and the ability to create phony bank account change requests. And after the session, a woman came up to me and she said, "Hey, I've got it. Thank you. Um, Last year you talked about payment fraud and I went home and I went to the most I was curious about what you said about how easy it was to create phony bank account change requests." And she said she went home and she talked to the most tech savvy person in her life. That was her 12-year-old son. She told him at dinner about the example I gave about how easy it was to be able to create a phony bank account change request and impersonate a supplier. And she challenged her son to create one that could fool her mom. Well, anyone who's a parent knows that there's nothing more than a kid likes than to be able to pull one over on their parents. And so, as she tells the story, she says he ran upstairs after dinner. And in the time it took her to wash the dishes, he came bounding down the stairs, piece of paper in hand. And what she saw horrified her. She saw at the top of the paper was the logo of a supplier her company does business with. That was the only piece of information that she had given her son. But she saw how professionally done this document looked, and that gave her pause. But then when she started to read down, she really got scared. She said the document was obviously professionally written. Now, this is her 12-year-old son who knows nothing about accounts payable, accounts receivable, or bank change requests. She said, "Well, where did this come from?" She said, "Well, there's templates out on the internet." And then she saw that it was the actual bank name that she knows her supplier does business with. "Well, where did you find this?" she said. Well, it was out on the internet again. She was able to find this. And then at the bottom was the name of her contact over at that supplier. Now, I didn't give him this, she says. Where did this come from? Well, you're connected to him on LinkedIn. I assume that this is the person that you would do business with. This is the scope of the problem. And the really scary thing is that because of AI now, as we plug one gap, fraudsters can adapt their changes. So those Nigerian prince emails, they went on for quite a while. They just kind of died out, right? They weren't effective. But that's not how today's fraud schemes work. Today, the fraudsters are constantly adapting. So I heard of one scheme recently where fraudsters are banging up against email addresses in AP departments, looking for out of office messages from the most senior AP staff. Why would they do that, you ask? Because that's the time to strike. They're going to assume that someone who might be filling in or of less seasoned than that person won't know everything to look for in a phony bank account change request. And so that's when they strike. And it's this constant adaptation that really keeps us on our toes. And it exposes one big weakness in the way that we go about validating bank account change requests. And that is that we built our systems based on trust, right? We trusted that if we hit reply to that email, it would be the person we thought it was on the other end. If we picked up the phone and called the phone number of the person on that email, that would be the person. Or maybe if we dialed up the number that was in our vendor master database, the person on the other end would be the person we think they are. We trusted, but we never really validated that what was being told back to us was actually true. And the problem is that, well, AP is the front line of defense against these fraud schemes. And so trust is okay, but verification and validation is essential because this is how these schemes work. Today, a fraudster is going to go ahead and target an organization. They're going to map out the contacts. Who's who, right? Who's the AP per people? Who's the CFO? Who's the AR counterparty in the supplier? They're going to try and hack into somebody's system so they can understand when it is that invoices are submitted, what the typical amounts are, who are the contacts, maybe when payment runs are made. And then at that right time, once they've collected enough information and they've verified that they know enough, then they're going to go ahead and start to perpetrate the crime. They're going to create a believable email, just like the one that woman who attended my session son created. Maybe they'll make a call or some other document. They're going to test defenses. And then once they know that they are in, once they know that they've got the trust of the counterparty, woof, now they're going to send that notice to redirect the payment to a new bank account. This is one of the biggest misperceptions about today's fraud schemes. People assume that once the supplier is hacked, the fraudster is going to make that bank account change request at the earliest possible moment. But it's not true. In many cases, it takes 6 to 9 months for the crime to occur because what they want to do is make sure they do their social engineering, understand the timing, and perpetrate it at the time that's most likely to succeed. And here's the pivot point. If you're using those outdated processes for validating information in bank account ownership, chances are you're going to fall victim to these crimes, particularly if you believe the sense of urgency that's attached to many of these. Business email compromise schemes are the fastest growing electronic payment scheme out there. And in almost every case, they are counting on someone falling victim to this urgency. Us AP folks, we're people pleasers, we're rule followers. We want to help the company. And so when we receive an email or a text, or maybe even a call from a CFO that says, oh, we've got to make this change or else our supply chain is going to come to its knees, we want to do what's right. And then unfortunately, if we don't validate that bank account ownership correctly, those funds are going to be moved into an account that a fraudster controls. And almost as soon as they hit the account, they're going to be whisked away to a far away account where it's nearly impossible for the funds to be recovered. Today, only about 20% of all funds involved in business email compromise schemes are ever recovered. 20%, folks. And so it's imperative that we make sure that we don't let those funds go unless they've been validated. And this is our problem, right? The traditional controls we use aren't inherently bad, right? It's not a lack of effort or good intentions. It's just that they're failing at the seams. In many cases, email and spreadsheets make it hard to prove somebody's identity or the source of where request is coming from. In many cases, we've got this what I call circular validation, where our teams are confirming a request using data that was supplied in that request. So maybe it's the email address or it's the phone number, but they were all provided by guess who? The fraudster. In some cases, fraudsters are even setting up phony email or website domains. So they direct you to what appears to be a portal or a supplier website, and that information right on there is provided by the fraudster. Imagine that. We also have a lot of cases where organizations still believe that bank account ownership validation is just another routine task. It's another administrative function that we have to do. Well, the problem is that there's a lot of money riding on those validations. And so we need to create a cultural shift. And finally, in many cases, we have a lot of fragmented evidence. Maybe you only check bank account details periodically or for certain transactions or for a certain point in time. And then we just leave it alone. There's no continual assurance that everything is in order. One of the most common questions I get from AP folks is how often should we be validating the information in our vendor database? Well, the answer is every time you make a payment. So no payment should ever go out the door without making sure that all of the information associated with that vendor's record is still right. If you're doing that in a manual environment, I know you're rolling your eyes and saying, well, how the devil am I ever going to do that? Stay tuned. More on that in just a few minutes. So these controls that we have in the past simply aren't up to date enough. They're not modern. So what we need is a more modern approach to things. We need to find ways to verify identities against authoritative data, not just who's on the other end of the email or the phone call. We also need to make sure that we're independently verifying things like bank account details and sanction screening. We also want to make sure that we build in risk-based workflows with segregation of duties. We don't like to talk about internal fraud a lot in AP and finance, but the reality is that it's a thing. And there are cases, much more frequently, unfortunately, where inside individuals are assisting these fraudsters. We also want to make sure that we're continuously monitoring our vendor data and alerting our teams whenever something looks not quite right. And finally, we need to make sure that we have audit ready documentation of every single action we take to verify and validate supplier information. If you're sending out Nacha payments, ACH payments to your suppliers, today Nacha requires you to have audit ready documentation on how it is that you went about validating bank account ownership for your suppliers. Now, if you're using spreadsheets and emails to do that, that's going to be really difficult. I expect more regulators are going to be looking for that audit ready information. This makes it hard in today's environment. There's really three moments that really require us to take a harder look at what's going on with our vendor information. And the first, of course, is the obvious one. When we set up a vendor, We need to make sure that the business is real, that they're active, that they're actually connected to the person enrolling it. This is where that segregation of duties comes into play. We also need to make sure that we focus hard on any bank account change requests. And for my AP leaders in the audience, I know that this is one that you're probably feeling intimately. You've got to find a way to ensure that the account belongs to the expected entity and that the request was independently confirmed. So, in other words, we want to make sure that we have some way to verify that information from a third party source, not just taking somebody's word from it, even if it's somebody who we trust because we've done business with them over the years. And it's not just making sure that the account is open. I know many of you use penny tests, which have some value, but it's not just making sure that that account can accept a deposit. It's also making sure that the name on that account matches the name of the person we want to pay, that the account is located somewhere where it makes logical sense for the vendor. So, in other words, if the supplier is based in Texas, why would the account be in Eastern Asia? We also want to make sure that that account wasn't just set up or just reopened, or that other information on that account, such as the TIN, all jive. And finally, the third moment that deserves scrutiny is whenever the ownership or contacts change. So, do we have a new point of contact at the vendor, or is somebody trying to hijack it? These three moments should all be considered as key risk events, not just another thing that we do each day. And business email compromise really is weaponizing these weaknesses in our organizations. You've probably received these texts, these emails, even these now AI generated phone calls where we have these urgent requests to bypass a normal protocol to make a change to bank account details. One Midwestern airport recently fell victim to a business email compromise scheme and lost more than $1 million. And it turns out that they had some manual processes, and somebody indeed cut a corner in conducting those manual processes. But humorously, I know, I'm not the airport, but I did find this part funny. I did find it interesting that the request involved a delivery of salt, which in the summer in the Midwest is would have raised my suspicion. But nonetheless, this shows you that these urgent requests to get these done um, really should be a red flag in our organizations. So, how is it that you can go about mitigating your organization's risk of falling victim to phony bank account change requests? Well, the first is to use a secure, controlled channel. In many organizations, bank account change requests come in from multiple points in the organization, typically, yep, through email, right? Maybe every office or every region of your company, and they're handled in slightly different ways, and they eventually trickle up to someone in the central office, hopefully. Uh, what you want to do is you want to have one on ramp for those bank account change requests, ideally an online portal where then you can authenticate the identity of the person and the organization. You want to make sure that you verify that the organization is who they say they are, and that the contact person who's submitting the information is who they say they are. And ideally, this would be done with some automation as well as some human rigor. Next, you want to make sure that you validate any information that's provided by the organization. So, of course, you want to make sure you do TID matching. This could be automated as part of the onboarding process. Additionally, things like sanction screening and OFAC checking should also be done at this point. And you also want to make sure that you validate the ownership of the bank account. All of this should be done with independent sources whenever possible. Of course, IRS database, the OFAC watch list and other watch lists, and of course, third party sources for bank account ownership. which we'll talk about a little bit later. This validation is really the pivot point. This is the trap door that many organizations fall into. They're undoubtedly doing something to make sure that they verify bank account change requests, and they're probably well intentioned. The problem is it's certainly not automated, so it takes too long and it's too prone to errors and mistakes and quarter cutting. But additionally, it's really vulnerable to AI generated attacks. Somebody could follow all the processes and still get tricked. And that brings us to the next step, which is applying risk-based routing. So once you've validated information, there's going to be things that don't quite align, even in cases where the individual or the supplier are legitimate. Someone needs to take a look at it. And it's key that not all transactions are created equally. So you want to make darn well sure you pay a little closer attention to a new supplier versus an older supplier, or maybe one with a high dollar transaction, or maybe one that's located internationally. Whatever rules you set up, you want to make sure that you apply risk vectors to those different scenarios. And then on an ongoing basis, you want to watch for post-change anomalies. You want to look for those things that could indicate something isn't quite right. And to do all this, well, there's four pillars. The first is to make sure you know who it is you're enrolling or changing the vendor. You also want to do independent validation, controlled workflows, and continuous assurance. The first step in all of that, of course, is to prove the vendor identity. You want to confirm the legal and tax identity of everyone you're doing business with before you ever make a payment to them. You also want to authenticate the person who's enrolling that organization, validate their information, validate ownership links, and then, of course, screen against sanctions and risk data for those individuals as well as the company. Any anomalies should be routed for review. Next, you want to make sure you validate bank account ownership. This is where automation really plays a huge role. You want to confirm the routing and account status, and you want to do it on multiple dimensions. So it's, like I said, not just enough that the account is open. You want to compare account and vendor names. You want to flag any mismatches, and you want to make sure that you route those for closer inspection. Importantly, you also want to make sure you automatically retain all the results of all bank account verification validations so that they're ready for an audit process. Next, wherever possible, you want to use independent evidence. Uh, Phone numbers in change of request emails. Of course, most of you probably wouldn't rely on those. You want to try and go to your vendor record database. But we all know that not all cases do we have those phone numbers there. Or maybe people won't answer the phone because they're working remotely or for some other reason. So you've got to make sure you take the effort to find a phone number that's not in an email. Certainly, you don't want to rely on a message thread or links or documents from a requester. Your organization probably is testing you periodically to make sure you're not clicking on links from emails that originate outside your organization. And today's conversation is another good reason why that shouldn't happen. Recently heard of one scam that perpetrated or purported to be emails from an ERP vendor. And in case you don't know, there are lists of every company that use every ERP on the market. So it's easy to target organizations with these types of emails. And in the email, it said it's time to update your password, which is something we all deal with on a regular basis, right? Seems pretty logical, seems pretty benign. Click on this link and go ahead and update your email. Problem is, when you clicked on that link, it loaded some malicious software into the individual's email, and that's where the phishing scheme began. So even in those emails that look to be on the up and up, it's hard to tell. And finally, we know that relying solely on employee judgment, even the judgment of our most seasoned staff, is never a good idea. And now that we've experienced some turnover in our AP departments, well, fact is that independent staff isn't always around anymore. And finally, we don't want to stop once we've verified and validated a supplier. We want to make sure that before any payment is ever made to a supplier, that we go back and do it all again. So we want to make sure that we have an automated way to make sure we have the TIN information, that that the vendor hasn't shown up on a sanctions list or OFAC watch list, or that bank account details aren't out of date. So what can you do to start putting all of these tips to work? Well, the first is to take a hard look at your organization. I know. You all have policies and procedures in place for verifying bank account change requests and onboarding suppliers and managing vendor data. But have you really taken a hard look at how they've adapted to today's AI environment? I want you to inventory all the different ways that requests come into your organization. Take a look at the steps involved in verifying bank account ownership, those data sources, owners, and exception paths. And then start to identify the gaps, the potential problems with those processes. Next, I want you to start at using those gaps to strengthen your proof. I want you to require a secure intake, one way that all information enters your organization for onboarding suppliers and managing changes to vendor information. Then I want you to build in some automated solutions for independently verifying the identity and information provided by organizations. And build in risk-based workflows so that as anomalies are detected, they can be routed for closer inspection. And finally, I want you to launch continuous monitoring in your organization. Create metrics for how it is vendors are onboarded. Some of these might just be operational metrics. The aha is going to be not just how much time you spend, but how many errors you prevent and how much risk you mitigate. Fact is our AP departments are a front line of defense for our organizations when it comes to mitigating our risk. AI is making it harder than ever for us to be able to discern what's real and what's fake. If you build in the pillars that I've discussed today with a good automated solution, you'll be able to reduce your risks. Now, you might be wondering, where can I find one of these solutions? Well, luckily enough, Phil is here to show us a live demonstration of VendorInfo, one solution that can automate the process of onboarding suppliers and managing changes to their information. Phil?
Thank you so much, Mark, and hello, everyone, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. Glad you're here, and I'm hoping that you're finding this very interesting and helpful. Uh, what our customers are telling us is that with vendor info, they're able to move from manually collecting information across their entire organization from vendors to automatically collecting it, automatically verifying it in real time, and then having it in a place where they can review it and approve it and then upload it into their ERP system in the vendor master file. And this is what it looks like. And what you're going to see here in this high level overview is the fully automated version. But you can also just get modules that allow you to do just certain things, like maybe just validate bank accounts or just validate TINs. But today you're going to see what the fully automated and vendor facing uh, application looks like. Uh, your vendors would come to a screen that or a site that's branded like you, and if they're new vendors, they go here, and if they're already a vendor and making a change, they go over here. I'll say we're a new vendor, and I'm going to click here, and everything that you want to collect from the supplier is included. And all of these forms are really designed around your forms and your collection requirements. So you can have the name of the company and the address and the description of the services. You may have more fields than this, you may have less. Uh, the physical business address of the supplier, the remittance address of the supplier, any contact information, the banking information, which would be, is it US based, which it comes up with a certain group of fields, or are they non-US based, which based on the country would come up with a different set of fields as well. And their tax information, where they can actually, you can have them fill out a W-9 if you like, but you can also have them fill out a substitute W-9, which more and more people are going to, because it eliminates a form and everything that's on the W-9 is here. The IRS accepts it. These are all updated, whether it's the regular W-9 or the substitute W-9 or the W-8s. All of these are updated as the IRS updates their forms, which they do from time to time. You can collect uh, diversity and ESG information if you want here. You can have people upload their certifications. You can have them upload their certificates of insurance. And what you want to require the vendor to provide is really up to you. So the supplier submits this, and then what happens is that information gets validated in real time. And I will come over here. You'll have a dashboard, and with the dashboard, you're able to see the status, who has submitted what is remaining to be submitted, uh, how much of the how much has been completed, and you're able to see the validations. So this happens to be us, Financial Operations Networks. Everything's color coded: green, yellow, and red, depending on whether it's good to go, or there might be a problem, or there might be a really big problem if it's red. Uh, this is us. Everything is green. The address got matched with the U.S. Postal Service. The tin was matched with the IRS. We're not on any sanctions lists. We're not on any government naughty lists like the SAM list or the OIG list, white collar crime, OFAC, EU, UK, UN, cybercrime. All of these are good to go. If there was a problem, like there is here with the booth, that shows up in red. And in this particular case, there was an there was an error with the tin, and it did not match with what the IRS had. And the address was also suspect as well. So you're able to get back with the supplier right from the system and have them correct it. All corrections, all interactions are logged into the system. The whole process is audit trail ready. And whenever your internal controls wants to see something during audit time, you have reports that can show freely for everything, who did what and when they did it. For bank account validations, the system validates every single bank account in the world. So this is us again. There's a 9-point check on the routing number, the account number, the company name, the address, the city, the state, the zip, and the TIN. And there is also, where it's available, a map and a picture. This is where we are. This is where we happen to be in Atlanta. If there was a problem with the bank account validation, and I'll show you an example here with Crazy Jim's Pizza. In this particular case, this is yellow, and it's problematic. Uh, it's a real account. This is a demo example, but it's a real account, and that account exists. But the name on the account and the address don't perfectly match what the bank has on file. The zip code and the TIN don't perfectly match. These are alerts, and alerts means there's maybe a couple of characters off. It could be something transposed. The city and the state don't match at all, and those are warnings. So in this particular case, we have another methodology where we can actually uh, ping ping the vendor's bank with a small transaction. They send that transaction back, and all of the information that's needed to accurately and properly validate that bank account is included, and it's called a reverse trace. As your folks go through the review submitted forms, they'll be able to check everything. If it matches and everything is good to go, they click here and they click approve. And everybody has different review and approval workflows. Some of them are very simple. Maybe it's just one path with a couple of different levels. Some folks have various paths based on uh, criteria, such as the type of vendor or the business unit. Uh, it, all of these are really configured for the customer, and some people have multiple levels, two, three, four, five, six different levels of approval. Whatever your workflow process is for validating bank accounts and all other information before the vendor gets into your vendor file, VendorInfo will accommodate for you. And once the last approval is done, then it is output and it can be uploaded right into your vendor master file. So, Mark, I know that's really a high level, kind of short overview, uh, but I will tell you that some of our customers are finding this helpful, and we'll make it available to anybody on the call. The CFO's guide to the hidden costs of manual data, manual vendor data management. If Mark's going to put up our address and contact information, you can just ping me and I'll get that out to you this afternoon. If you'd like to have a copy of this ebook. Mark, maybe it's a good time to, I know we're running out of time, but maybe it's a good time to see if there are any questions that folks have.
Indeed, let's do that. If you haven't submitted a question for Phil, or if you've thought of another question for Phil, go ahead, use that Q&A tool on your screen to submit your question to me now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Our first question up is from Rob. Rob's wondering what's involved in integrating this with his ERP, and how does that work with updating the vendor record?
Sure. Great question, Rob. Uh, the system is ERP agnostic. We have various ways of outputting this information so that it can upload your ERP uh, uh, really in real time as soon as the last submission was made. That output file can go right up to you and be ready for input into your ERP system.
Suzanne wants to know how long it takes to get a response on a ownership of a bank account.
Sure. It's interesting there, and that's a really good question. Uh, for any bank account that's in a database, which is most all the bank accounts, not 100%, but most of the bank accounts in the United States, and a very rapidly increasing number of international bank accounts, uh, that turnaround time is instantaneous. It's all moving at the speed of light, and between the time that the supplier presses the submit button and the time you can actually get onto the site, it's already validated. Where there is no data, the account is in no database at all, then we do the little mini transaction, pinging the bank process, and that's dependent on when the supplier returns that mini deposit back to the designated bank account. So I mean, it could be the same day, but it's rare. It's generally a couple of days, and it can take more if the vendor's not returning it promptly.
He wants to know more about the tin matching as part of this solution.
Sure. So, great question. For tin matching, we hook right up to the IRS and ping the IRS database, and excuse me, and come back with a match or a mismatch immediately.
Michelle wants to know, what ERP systems do you integrate with?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Michelle. Every single one. This is ERP agnostic. We have hundreds of customers. They, you know, many of them use the really big ones, big ERP systems, but others use kind of small and, depending on the industry, sometimes very specialized ERP systems. It doesn't matter to us or to you.
That will be our final word. If you're interested in learning more about VendorInfo, setting up a personalized demo, or getting a free copy of that guide that Phil mentioned a few moments ago, simply email him at the email address now displayed on your screen. On behalf of Phil, this is Mark Rousseau. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Hope to speak with you all again soon.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.